So I want to encourage you, and this is why we've got those pews in the Bible. If you don't have your Bible along, turn to page 833 if you've got those thicker ones. There's some that have been interspaced because we've been adding other ones in as we run out, but don't worry, we're going to keep putting more in. And here's my other encouragement to you. Those Bibles that are in the pew, if you so feel led, you know what, I want to take this home because you've been writing in the margin, feel free to. Terry has gotten us such a great deal on those Bibles. And the very reason why we've gone to this way is so that you can take Bibles home without worrying about taking them home. So page 833. But I want to talk to you about predictions. I'm going to start off with some wrong predictions. The World Exhibition in Paris in 1900, according to one group of educators, in the year 2000, children would no longer need to read. A learning machine would transmit all of the information directly from books right into their brains. Now, wouldn't that have been great? A German chocolate company shared drawings at that same fair that showed that society's solution to bad weather would be massive roofs covering all the cities. I thought that was a great idea, at least for Winnipeg in the winter, wouldn't it? What about some other predictions that were exactly the other side, where something caught on that the person made the prediction that it wouldn't? Well, back in 1993, a young college student was introduced to a novel new idea on how to communicate. You would take two computers, take the phone line, which made this weird, funny noise, and they would talk to each other at the same time, and they could instant message each other. That young college student said, "That's ridiculous. Why don't you just pick up your phones and talk to each other?" That guy was totally wrong. That was me. Everybody instant messages today. Predicting the future is huge business. It has been in the past and still is today. Now, don't misunderstand me. Looking forward and having thoughtful planning, like planning a trip like Heather and I are going to for our 25th anniversary next month, that should be done. Don't just show up in London and say, now what? Where are we staying? Or planning the future education and your career paths and goals. Planning on how you intend to raise your family, where your children will go to school, planning for your retirement. All of those things are good. A big part of our planning for the future includes our hopes and aspiration. But there's a huge difference between our hopes and aspirations and an obsession to know, to control that things that you have no ultimate control over. Now, predictions, they sell well. We laugh at people who buy horoscopes or read them in the newspaper, and they actually go to palm readers, and they base their truth on those. But here's a hard, unfortunate truth. We as Christians get caught up in this obsession too. Does anybody remember the thing called the blood moons a few years back? Four blood moons. I preached this sermon, not this sermon, but I preached on this passage, almost 14 years ago. And at that time, it was the 4 blood moons. And I'm actually glad that none of you remember, because it was so unimportant. But I had people who actually came to me after I preached this sermon saying, "You missed the blood moons." What are the blood moons? Well, actually, it's a completely misunderstanding of what a lunar eclipse is. A lunar eclipse is where the Earth and the moon goes into the Earth's shadow, and for a short period of time, because of the Earth's atmosphere, the moon looks red. And there were 4 of them in 1 year, and that was certainly going to bring about end times prophecies, was it not? And actually well-known preachers that I respect jumped on that bandwagon, and they sold millions of books. And the reason I bring it up is because last year the interns, Hannah was one of them, pulled all these books out of our church library, and lots of people before 2014, when the 4 blood moons showed up, had taken the books out. And guess how many people took them out after 2014? 0, right. And then we found other books in there by guys like Jerry Falwell from back in 1988. He predicted that the end of the world would come, and nobody took that book out after 1989. Guess what happened to that book? It got taken out of the library. Another guy named Pat Robertson in 82 predicted the end of the world. His book hadn't been taken out since 1982. Let's not be too harsh on the world, because we get caught up in these same things. And here's the part where some people are disappointed when I preach on the book of Daniel. I want to tell you, the book of Daniel is all about predicting the future that already occurred. Well, here's what I mean. They were accurate predictions of events that were about to occur, some immediate, some over hundreds of years, and 99.9% of them came true. Because if they did not, they wouldn't be in our Bible. This is a book that is not about predicting the future for us. It is for us to say, look, this is what the truths and the prophecies that were given to the Jewish people as they looked forward to the coming of Christ. This book is also an incredible book of a young man being level-headed. Monica and I were talking about this. We realized that Daniel was the same age in this story as Tyler. Can you imagine that? Somebody as level-headed as Daniel, the same age as Tyler. Actually, we were joking that he had a level head. You could put a book on his head. And no, but we're just putting this perspective how important this is to recognize the ages. The age. So last week we were dealing with teenagers. This week we're dealing with young adults. And look at how trusting God is put in. So let's dig into chapter 2. If I can have Ruth come up and read to us the first part of this chapter. She'll be reading verses 1 to 23, and it'll be on the overhead.
Okay, so again, Daniel 2, 1 to 23. In the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Then the astrologers answered the king, May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. The king replied to the astrologers, This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Once more they replied, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it. Then the king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time, because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. The astrologers answered the king, There is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, Why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went in to the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Starting off with verse 1. The 2nd year of King Nebuchadnezzar's reign, this story happened. Now, that might seem confusing to you because at this point, we said Daniel and his friends have been in Babylon for a while. Well, Nebuchadnezzar's been king for quite a while. but it's a complicated kingship. Nebuchadnezzar took over from his father 7 years before Daniel and his friends were taken captive. So how can this be in his second year of being king? Well, let me explain to you. Nebuchadnezzar's father had been an Assyrian governor of the city of Babylon. That means he was a regional governor, King Nebuchadnezzar's dad. And he was part of a group that rebelled and had brought the Babylonian people into their own people group. And they actually led a wider rebellion that eventually destroyed the Assyrian people. So the Assyrians, who were they? They were the dreaded empire that destroyed the kingdom to the north of Judah. So they took the Israeli people, the Israelites, into captivity. They're who Isaiah is talking about when he's saying, you will be taken into captivity. He had them in mind. Why? Because that's exactly what happened to Israel. It's also when you read about crucifixion. Crucifixion was invented by the Assyrians. Now, it was perfected by the Romans. What I mean by perfection is they made it worse, harsher, lasted longer. But the Assyrians were this terrible people group that crushed others around them. And the Babylonians were the ones to overthrow them. And they got this group of other nations around to join in with them to overthrow the Assyrians. Now, by the way, I'd just like to point out, we have an Assyrian in our congregation. Tony, can you wave? Oh, that's great. Okay, so when we introduced the Assyrians last year, when we talked about Nineveh, Tony shared about his faith story from his extended family, and it was an awesome journey that we talked about. But we also have a family that are Babylonians in our church, and that's actually Rad and Enos. Isn't that amazing? We've got Babylonians and Assyrians in our church. We've also got Persians. We'll talk about them in the next couple of weeks. And here's some really great news. Spoiler alert. Every time that you're the main enemy of the people of God, I've got good news. He's the one that's going to bring them into the people of God. Because the very first groups in the whole world to willingly accept outside of Israel in large portions were the historical enemies of the people of God. So the Babylonian church, the Assyrian church are actually a merged church today, and they stand firm in the midst of some incredible persecution. So I just wanted to point that out, that's so interesting. So Nebuchadnezzar, it took him quite a few years to actually completely take over what now became the Babylonian Empire. And the year that occurred and was completed was the year 586, 585. Those are important dates because that's the same time that the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed and the rest of Judah went into captivity. So this is 2 years after that occurred. That would make Daniel and his friends in their mid-20s. Now, another thing we need to note, the book of Daniel is written differently than other books in the Bible. So, for instance, this is written in the third person for much of it. Sometimes it goes back to first person. When you're writing in third person, what does that mean? You're saying, they went there, they did this, they did that. Occasionally it says, now I did this. So what is that telling us? This is a hybrid of an autobiography and somebody retelling the story. So this means that somebody collected Daniel's journals and wrote them down in the way that we have them. That somebody was most likely Ezra or Nehemiah. I lean towards the prophet Nehemiah, who wrote a big portion in our Old Testament, and he's one of the ones who collected much of what we have as the Old Testament. So what I mean by that is the prophet books. So the major prophets and the minor prophets, that was collected by Nehemiah because he wanted Israel and Judah to see this is what God had said in the past. And look how it's come to fruition. And look what we're looking forward to eventually with the coming Messiah. So remember that. There is an editor in this story that wrote this down a few decades after Daniel probably passed away, saying, look at how these predictions came true exactly. Look what's still to come. We can trust God's predictions. That's important in this story. So that means these young men have probably lived in the kingdom for 10 to 12 years. And that's when Nebuchadnezzar had this dream, a disturbing dream. And if you're going to think logically about a king who is now considered the king of kings, what would a disturbing dream be to him? Well, it could be because he'd been putting down rebellions across the empire for over a decade. What could have been his scary dreams? He was that somebody's going to overthrow me. Somebody's going to kill me in the night. But he couldn't put his finger on what was this dream. Dreams. We all have dreams. Every night, every single one of us dream. On average, scientists say we have 3 to 6 dreams a night. Just last night, I know I had a vivid dream, and I can't remember any of it anymore. And I'm going to ask Chris to tell me what the dream was and interpret it for me, right? No, of course not. That's a ridiculous statement. Like, just because I can't remember it, that's doubly so. Like, that's exactly what Nebuchadnezzar was doing. Think about that. Nebuchadnezzar would not tell him the dream because he could probably not remember it. All he remembered was the sense of dread. Mine was a sense of excitement. So maybe it was going to England. I don't know. But his was a sense of dread. Let me tell you that this was a huge part of Babylonian culture to talk about interpretation of dreams. You know, you can actually go online and find translations of books about how to translate dreams from this time of Babylon. Let me just give you a couple of ones that I got from the Bible Project, and it's just really priceless. You had a bad dream, so then what they'd do is if you had the bad dream, you'd go outside and you would feed the chickens. And if you fed the chickens and the chickens ate the food right away, don't worry, maybe it was something you ate. Haha. Okay, but if the chickens didn't want to eat, because chickens in the morning, they're hungry, right? Chickens in the morning, if they don't eat right away, oh, maybe something's bad. So now you take one of those chickens, I don't know how you choose which chicken, and that chicken gets sacrificed. And then they cut it open and they check the entrails. And if the entrails are wrong, well, that's a worse omen. How do entrails look wrong? I would like to know that. Okay, so now the entrails look wrong. Oh boy, let's check the liver. If the liver looks or is wrong in some way, that's a really bad omen. And finally, to figure out where we're going to go next, the person who's going to interpret the dream gets the liver fried up and you eat it. I'm not in for that job at all because chicken livers are gross. This is what they were thinking about in this type of manner, how to interpret the dream. But they had to first know what the dream was. Now, I would totally be like those wise men. And that's the other word that gets used. We saw astrologers, magicians, but they're also interspersed with the name wise men because they were the wise of the land. I would respond in the same way and say, this is an unreasonable thing to ask. Just like I said to Chris, tell me what my dream was last night so you can interpret it. They said, this is not fair. See, there's a big difference between these wise men and Daniel. Daniel knows you don't argue with an unreasonable person because it'll often only get worse. Nebuchadnezzar, boy, it only got worse. He declared that he was going to put them to death. Now that was an escalation. When the commander of the king's guard came to put Daniel and his friends to death, Daniel, this is really important for us, spoke to him with wisdom and tact. I love how Monica said just before the service, isn't it amazing how when everybody's going crazy, doing crazy things, there's this guy Daniel who's just calm in the middle. Spoke with wisdom and tact. And what did that wisdom and tact do? It got him an audience before Nebuchadnezzar who calmed him down enough to say, give me time. And that was something he needed. And what did he do with his time? He fretted, right? He fretted. No, he gathered his friends and they prayed earnestly. And when God gave them the answer, this is what he said, praise be the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. All the way through, Daniel will continue to say that term. Wisdom and power are his, not Daniel's. And he doesn't put himself down and say, I'm worthless, I'm a worm. He said, I am a servant and a messenger of the God of the universe, but I am just a servant. I'm so thankful to be a servant of such an esteemed, the most important position I could ever want. But I am just a servant. That is humility and a sense of, yeah, I represent the King of Kings, the real King of Kings. That's the type of behavior and attitude that we need to have. And he ends with a great prayer of thanks. He says basically, God, we were stuck in a corner, but you have a plan, and you revealed it to us, and I give you all the credit. So now when Daniel comes to Nebuchadnezzar and tells him, the first thing he says to him, he says, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain the king the mysteries that he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. That is such an important passage too. As for me, this mystery was revealed to me, not because I have a greater wisdom than anyone else alive. Listen to his words. But so that you, your majesty, may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. So now here's the dream. A large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awe in appearance. I'm at verse 32. The head of the statue is made of pure gold, the chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partially of iron and partially baked with clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron and clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken into pieces and became like chaff on a thresherman's floor in the summer. The wind blew them away without a trace, but the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain that filled the whole earth. Now, here's where the danger comes, where I've gotten into quote-unquote trouble with others before. They said, this is talking about end times. Well, yes, it is, but no, it isn't. Here's what I mean. Yes, it is talking about end times. Anything that's about Jesus is about end times. Why? Because Jesus is the end of all. Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. When Jesus came and fulfilled all the prophecies of the Old Testament, and the very small few that he didn't fulfill are to come, that is end times. But this is really about the coming of Jesus the Messiah under the Roman Empire. I read lots of different scholars. They all agree on this basic idea of good, reputable scholars of what this represented. Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians were the gold statue, part of the statue. Cyrus and Darius and the Persians were the silver. Alexander the Great and the Greeks were the bronze, and finally the iron with clay baked into its feet were the Romans. Now, the original readers of this at this time would not have seen the later ones, but they would have seen the first ones already in action. They would have said, wow, that's just like Daniel predicted, and we're in the midst of it. And that would have given them hope, saying, things are hard, because it wasn't just during this time it was hard. When you're a people group in exile, things are often going to be thrown at you with hardship. The story of Esther. Oh, I'd love to get into that one yet. Maybe that's in 3 years from now, a Christmas, because I already told you the other two that I was planning to do, right? But Esther, look, the entire Jewish people were going to be wiped out. They prayed almost identical to the way that Daniel prayed here. And the Jews would then take comfort knowing that God was still in control. That is what this book is ultimately all about. God is in control, and we are God's servants and messengers, and that is a great honor. Upon hearing the message, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering of incense to be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and the revealer of mysteries, and that you were able to reveal the mystery. He then placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him rule over the entire province of Babylon and placed in his charge all its wise men. Moreover, Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained loyal in the court. Okay, now just jumping ahead next week, if you look at the next chapter, it's about the fiery furnace and the big statue. You can see who says, yes, I accept this, but what does he do? He tries to take control himself once again. But that's next week's message. But let's talk about a few things of our so now what. First of all, there are two popular ways that people deal with the future historically, both now and in the past. One, they obsess about the future to determine what is happening around them, and they want to control it. That's exactly what Nebuchadnezzar did. And interestingly, that is the go-to default of the Jews, God's people in Judea when Jesus was preaching to them. That is exactly why Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you eat or drink, or about your body or what you wear. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or stow away in barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they are? Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? Jesus is talking to a people group who are just like this. And he also says in the parable to the rich man, the rich foolish man who builds bigger barns, in Luke chapter 12, verse 6, he says, this is how it'll be. Whoever stores up things for themselves is not rich in the ways of God. But then there's the other side, the Greek side. It's actually interesting. Jesus talks very plainly about stop worrying. But Paul actually has to tell the Greeks the exact opposite side. It's called Epicurism. I've told you this term over and over again. And that is the one where that it says, eat, drink, party, for tomorrow we may die. The whole concept is don't worry about tomorrow because, you know what, I don't know if we'll live. Live only for the moment. Paul actually tells over and over again, whether it's in Thessalonians or Colossians, Corinthians or Galatians, plan for the future. Plan like you're going to follow God now and in the future and use your finances and your time well. I want to read to you what James has to say, Jesus' younger brother, because he's speaking to this same audience that's doing this. He says, now listen, today or tomorrow we will go, he says, now listen, you say, today or tomorrow we'll go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why do you even know that what happens tomorrow? What is your life? There's a mist that appears for a while and then vanishes. Instead you ought to say, I love this, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. If it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. Do you see the third way? Because that's our faith in Jesus Christ, is not a mix between the two extremes of society. Have you ever noticed society's extreme? We've got one side on the left saying this, and you've got one side on the right saying that, and the temptation is like, we just need the middle way. No! We need a third way, a totally different way. Sometimes it looks like middle ground, but more often than not, it's a completely different idea. And Jesus' way is a third way. Over and over again, you're going to hear me in this series say, Jesus is a third way. I'm going to conclude with talking about how do we deal with difficult people. Going back to that idea, how did Daniel deal with unrealistic, unreasonable expectations from the wise that are given to the wise men? So now, the third way is like Daniel. The first way was what? Argue and say, that's unreasonable. When you're arguing with somebody who is unreasonable, instead, do like Daniel, speak with wisdom and tact. That does not mean that you're a pushover. That means you're responsibly reasoned and well thought through. If you're dealing at your job with a rude customer, speak to them with wisdom and tact. An unreasonable parent is best spoken to with wisdom and tact. A person who you disagree with at church during a church meeting is best spoken to with wisdom and tact. Now, I don't want to be overly simplistic and say there's never a time to speak firmly, but speaking firmly can also and has to be done with wisdom and tact. And remember, humility is the key to success in doing this. Humility diffuses most situations. Over and over again when you read this story, Daniel comes across with humility. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will inherit the earth. And that is using wisdom and tact. And that is an incredibly important tool that we need to add to de-escalate situations. Now, there's one person that I wish was still in our congregation, and I bless that he moved on to live near his kids in Alberta. But one of the people that I think of that is one of the best at wisdom and tact to de-escalate things was a guy named Russ Taves. Do you guys remember a guy named Russ Taves? What did he do that diffused situations? He had the best belly laugh you ever heard in your life. I think that was his superpower. Now, he would speak with wisdom and tact, and when things were rising, he would laugh somehow exactly the right way in the right time, not laugh at you, but laugh that diffused everything. Now, I've prayed, just like I've prayed, Lord, give me the gift of tongues. He said, no, my grace is sufficient for you. I've prayed, Lord, give me the ability to laugh like Russ. And he said, no, I've got to find my own way. But humility is in that. So what was Russ's real superpower? His demeanor, right? It's his demeanor. And I don't want to hold him up and say, oh, Russ is perfect at this. No, but man, he learned that wisdom and tact over almost 40 years of pastoral ministry. And that should be us as well. So, I want to close off with thanking God that He is both in control of the future and the present, and that He would help us to be those messengers of that truth, and that we would be able to share it with wisdom and tact. I'm going to invite the worship team to come up, and I'm going to close in prayer this part. Lord, I'm just amazed how a young man in his mid-20s could have such wisdom and tact and humility and the understanding of that's rooted in who he is as a follower of the God of the universe. What a great example he is to us. What a great example that we can follow. Lord, this week, when hard people come our way that ask us unreasonable things, may we have the same wisdom and tact, and may we grow in these things together, because when we have no answers, may we gather our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ and seek your wisdom on these things. And may we praise you when you give us the answers. In Jesus' name, amen.